Hi, my name is Gerhard Gschwandtner and welcome to Selling Power TV. Today we have the pleasure of continuing our conversation with Noam Bihar. He is the CEO of the Sales Readiness Group. Welcome, Noam.
Gerhard, it's great to be back with you.
So yesterday we talked about why to coach. Let's talk about when to coach.
Great. So I think it's a really natural transition. As I mentioned yesterday, there's the why behind sales coaching. So why should we coach? When to coach, which I actually think is probably the most complicated concept. And then hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to speak about how to coach. So going back to when to coach, I think it's really important to understand that every sales rep needs their own coaching plan. So coaching, unlike general management, isn't a one-size-fits-all. In other words, each sales rep has different skills that they can improve on. For one sales rep, that might be identifying priorities. For another sales rep, that could be improving how they negotiate, could be closing skills. So we want to create very tailored, individualized coaching plans.
Should sales managers look at the gap and then think about what coaching action is the most appropriate?
Absolutely. I think that you're spot on when you say identify gaps, because coaching really is about improving skills. So the first thing you have to do is really assess skill gaps, whether it's on prospecting, call planning, questioning, negotiating. And so what we like to recommend is that the manager look at each sales rep individually and take a look at their motivation. So are they really motivated to perform a certain skill? And how proficient they are. So let's say you have a veteran performer who's been in sales for years. They may be very proficient, they may be very good at prospecting, but they may not want to prospect. So you really have to think about whether the proficiency is high, the motivation is high, and what management action might be appropriate. And I think what you were hinting to is that coaching isn't always the right management action, so figuring out when to coach is really critical.
That brings up another question, which is, how do you deal with attitude deficiency versus skills deficiency?
So let's take the example of the seasoned rep who was very proficient at prospecting, but really wasn't motivated. So if you think about high proficiency, low to motivation, the right management action there would be counseling. No amount of coaching is really going to change motivation. You really have to have kind of a heart-to-heart with that individual. For example, they may be really correct that prospecting for new business for them may not be a high productivity item. They may have enough existing accounts. Then as a manager, you may have to have that subject. Well, would you mind if I turned over some of those accounts to someone who is interested in building those relationships?
So what you're almost talking about is deciding on the fly when not to coach.
Absolutely. So when you assess proficiency and motivation, you could have the opposite extreme. You could have a brand new rep who's very motivated to prospect for new business but doesn't know how. So if they're motivated but they don't know how, then something like training would be the right, because you really have to build their skills. Coaching is really about honing the skills. Training is really about developing the skills. So if someone's very motivated but not proficient, it's the exact opposite case we spoke about before. It's not counseling, it's training.
In your book, you also write about empowerment. Tell us about that.
Well, empowerment is the best of all worlds, and that's where you want to move from coaching to empowerment. Empowerment is where someone has great motivation and they have great skill. As an example, you may be a great negotiator. You may have been negotiating for years. So from an empowerment standpoint, what I want to do is give you more latitude, allow you to spend time negotiating really on your own, not really shadowing you. Maybe even setting you up as a mentor to others in terms of modeling how to negotiate.
And how much time should sales managers spend on coaching during the course of a month?
So a simplistic answer is as much as possible, but literature would suggest 25 to 40% of their time. And that could be formal coaching where they're going out and observing sales calls, and that could be informal coaching where they're just really discussing some of those key skills in the individual coaching plans for their reps.
It's a great ratio. You invest about 25% of your time, and then you get about 20% back in terms of increased productivity.
Right, and that 20% is really an annuity stream because you get that increased productivity year after year after year.
Thank you, Norman. We're going to continue our conversation with Norman tomorrow, where we talk about how to coach.